What if I told you that one single family quietly shaped the fate of Europe for nearly 700 years without conquering vast lands by sword, but by marriage, manipulation, and sheer political genius? And what if I also told you that this same dynasty's obsession with power would one day cause its own terrifying collapse, taking empires, kings, and centuries of European order down with it? This is the story of the Habsburg monarchy, Europe's ultimate power broker. From medieval castles hidden in the Alps to the grand halls of Vienna, the Habsburgs wove a dynastic web so vast that their bloodline touched nearly every royal throne in Europe. They didn't just rule nations, they engineered them. Their empire once stretched from Spain to Hungary, from the Netherlands to the New World itself. But behind this glittering facade of power lay an intricate maze of secrets, betrayals, and tragedies. The cost of keeping a dynasty alive at any price. So, buckle up, because what began as a minor medieval lordship would become one of the most powerful forces in human history, and its fall, one of the most dramatic in all of Europe. The birth of a dynasty. Why have you ever wondered how a single mountain family from the heart of the Alps rose to dominate nearly all of your upper-ruling empires, shaping wars and controlling the very marriages that decided kingdoms? It all begins with a man whose name history nearly forgot. Rudolph of Habsburg. The year is 1273. The Holy Roman Empire is crumbling. No emperor, no unity, only feuding princes and broken vows. Amid this chaos, the electors need a ruler weak enough to control, yet noble enough to wear a crown. They turn to a modest count from the Swiss mountains, a man so obscure his name barely echoes beyond his valley. Rudolph seems the perfect puppet. But the princes are wrong. The moment Rudolph places the crown upon his head, everything changes. He moves swiftly, decisively. He crushes rivals, secures Austria, and turns his family from mountain lords into power brokers. With that single move, the capture of Austria, the foundations of the Habsburg monarchy are set, and in the glow of his victory, Rudolph speaks words that will define his dynasty for centuries. Let others wage war. You, fortunate Austria, shall marry. That sentence becomes the family's weapon, their philosophy of conquest without battle. Where other kings draw swords, the Habsburgs draw marriage contracts. Each union adds a new territory, a new inheritance, a new pawn in their expanding chessboard of Europe. Daughters become diplomatic bridges, sons become political tools, and marriage becomes the quietest and deadliest form of war. Centuries pass, and the dynasty's influence grows like a web across Europe. Then comes Maximilian I, the architect of the empire. When he weds Mary of Burgundy in 1477, he wins not just her heart but one of the richest domains in Europe. His son Philip marries Joanna of Castile, bringing Spain, the Netherlands, and the New World into Habsburg hands. It is diplomacy turned into empire. By the early 1500s, the Habsburgs are no longer a family. They are a system, a living, breathing mechanism of control. They rule lands where the sun never sets, and their blood ties connect half of Europe's thrones. But that web of power has a cost. Inside their palaces, the Habsburgs begin to turn inward. Marrying for politics means marrying one's own kin. Cousins wed cousins. Uncles marry nieces. And slowly, the perfect machine begins to rust from within. The once beautiful faces of royalty begin to deform, marked by the infamous Habsburg jaw. Beneath the splendor of courtly life lurks a silent decay, warning from history that even the greatest dynasty cannot cheat nature forever. Yet at the height of their power stands one man who seems destined to defy fate itself. Charles V. When Charles inherits both Spanish and Austrian lands, he becomes the ruler of an empire so vast that he boasts, not without truth, that the sun never sets upon it. From the silver mines of the Americas to the battlefields of Europe, every dawn is his. He is emperor, king, and crusader in one. But Charles's dream is larger than his empire. He sees himself as the defender of a united Christendom, chosen by God to bring order to a fractured world. Against him stand the French kings, the Ottomans, and, perhaps most dangerously, the new voice of rebellion, rising from within his own lands, the Protestants. The Reformation tears through Europe like wildfire. Luther's words ignite towns and kingdoms. Suddenly, Charles faces a truth no sword can kill. Faith itself is dividing his empire. The emperor who sought to unite all of Europe finds himself fighting to keep it from collapsing. Years of war, exhaustion, and betrayal follow. Charles begins to feel the crushing weight of ruling an empire too large for one man. Finally, in 1556, in a monastery cloaked in silence, his trembling hands place two crowns on two heads. His brother Ferdinand receives the Austrian realm and imperial title. His son Philip inherits Spain and its colonies. The mighty Habsburg Empire splits in two. It seems a clever solution to lines. Two centers of power, one family. But in that moment of division, a new kind of tension is born. Vienna and Madrid become twin sons, each pulling Europe in opposite directions. The Austrian Habsburgs master politics and diplomacy. The Spanish Habsburgs chase glory, faith, and empire. Spain bleeds gold from the New World, but drowns in endless wars. The Austrian court, quieter and more calculating, learns the art of survival. When the Spanish line weakens, it is the Austrians who endure, watching with cold patience as cousins, kingdoms, and empires fall. Vienna becomes a fortress of power and elegance. Behind its marble walls, the Habsburgs turn diplomacy into a weapon more precise than any cannon. They play France against Prussia, Catholics against Protestants, neighbors against each other, all to keep their crown secure. While Europe burns in the 30 Years' War, the Habsburgs endure. Battered but unbroken. By the dawn of the 18th century, they have outlasted rivals who once seemed invincible. The Ottomans have been pushed back. The Bourbons rage in France. Yet still, the double-headed eagle of the Habsburgs hovers above Europe. Every treaty, every coronation, every war seems to lead, somehow, back to Vienna. But beneath that unshakable facade, cracks are forming. The Enlightenment whispers of reason and liberty. Revolution stirs in the distance. The people begin to see through the gilded curtain of monarchy. The same marriages that once united nations now bind the Habsburgs to a past that cannot survive the future. And so, as the century turns and Vienna's grand halls shimmer with candlelight and waltzes, a shadow moves quietly through the empire. The dynasty that once conquered by love and diplomacy is about to face a new kind of war of ideas, of freedom, of nations reborn. Because in the next chapter of the Habsburg saga, Europe will begin to ask a question the family has long feared. What happens when the world no longer needs kings? The web of Throns. Imagine a world where every royal marriage, every whispered promise, every handshake between kingdoms was part of a single, invisible plan spun from the heart of Vienna. By the dawn of the 18th century, that's exactly what the Habsburgs had created. Europe was their chessboard, and they were the quiet players moving queens, knights, and kings, not by force, but by bloodline. Yet as the candles of the old world flickered low, a new kind of fire was beginning to burn. The age of empires was shifting, and the Habsburg web was about to be tested like never before. In the glittering courts of Vienna, Maria Theresa walked the marble halls with a calm that masked a storm. She wasn't meant to rule. The laws of her empire forbade women from wearing the crown. But her father, Emperor Charles VI, desperate to keep the Habsburg bloodline alive, declared the pragmatic Sanctionan imperial decree that allowed his daughter to inherit his throne. It was a gamble that would unleash chaos across Europe. The moment Charles VI died in 1740, the vultures began to circle. Prussia, France, Bavaria all smelled opportunity. A young and ambitious Frederick the Great of Prussia struck first, invading Silesia, testing the strength of a 23-year-old queen who had never led an army. The War of the Austrian Succession erupted, and the world watched to see if the young empress could hold together an empire built by centuries of calculated marriage and diplomacy. Against all odds, Maria Theresa refused to yield. With fire in her heart and a crown heavy with history, she rode out before her Hungarian nobles, pleading not for obedience, but for loyalty. Her voice shook, but her words carried the power of generations. The nobles, moved by her courage, drew their swords in the air and shouted, Moria mer, pro rege nostro Maria, Teresa, we will die for our king, Maria Teresa. In that moment, the Habsburg spirit of survival flared anew. Vienna would not fall. Years of war followed, and though she lost Silesia, Maria Teresa held her empire together through sheer will and political genius. She reformed education, taxation, and the military, laying the groundwork for modern Austria. Yet behind her resilience was another truth she had learned: the Habsburg. Lesson 2. Well, power survives through marriage. She married her daughter, Marie Antoinette, into the Bourbon dynasty of France, hoping to end centuries of rivalry. It seemed brilliant, a bond between Vienna and Versailles, sealing peace through love. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. That marriage would one day send Marie Antoinette to the guillotine, and the roar of revolution would echo straight back to Vienna. For now, though, the empire basked in the illusion of stability. Vienna became Europe's elegant capital of diplomacy and art, where the air itself seemed to waltz. But beneath the music, the old ghosts stirred. Across Europe, whispers of freedom, of reason, of equality grew louder. The Enlightenment was sweeping the continent, and the Habsburgs, masters of tradition, could not stop the tide. Then came the storm. Napoleon Bonaparte, a man with no noble blood, no lineage, and no title, who would crush empires simply because he believed he could. He tore through Europe like a thunderbolt, toppling thrones and rewriting centuries of royal order. The Habsburgs, whose power had always depended on alliances, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy who cared nothing for their pedigrees or their crowns. Emperor Francis II watched as Napoleon dismantled the Holy Roman Empire itself, the very institution that had defined his ancestors. In 1806, under unbearable pressure, Francis made the decision that shattered 1,000 years of history. He dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, ending the realm that Charlemagne had once built and the Habsburgs had ruled for centuries. The double-headed eagle fell from the sky, and for the first time, the dynasty that once ruled all of Europe found itself naked before modernity. But even in defeat, the Habsburg instinct for survival returned. Francis crowned himself Emperor of Austria, ensuring that though the Holy Roman Empire died, the Habsburg legacy did not. Vienna, bruised but breathing, became the center of a new visioner, reimagined empire fit for a new world. When Napoleon's star finally fell at Waterloo, it was Vienna that decided the shape of the new Europe. The Congress of Vienna, in 1815, was the dynasty's masterpiece, a gathering of kings, ministers, and diplomats, all dancing under the chandeliers of Habsburg palaces, and at its center stood a man who embodied their result: genius for control, Prince Clemens von Metternich. Metternich was not a soldier, but a strategist, a puppeteer in silk gloves. He understood that the true battlefield of the 19th century was not fought with muskets, but with ideas, and that the Habsburgs could only survive by mastering those ideas, not resisting them. At the Congress, he reshaped Europe into a delicate balance of powers designed to preserve stability and, more importantly, the supremacy of the Habsburg crown. For nearly 40 years, Metternich's system kept Europe in fragile peace. The Habsburgs became the cautious guardians of the old order, defenders of monarchy against the rising tide of revolution. But time is merciless. The world outside their ornate palaces was changing. Factories belched smoke. Nationalism burned in the hearts of new generations, and beneath the chandeliers of Vienna, the dance was ending. When the revolutions of 1848 swept across Europe, the Habsburgs found themselves surrounded. Crowds filled the streets of Vienna demanding freedom, constitutions, and the end of imperial rule. Metternich fled the city in disguise, his system collapsing overnight. For the first time in centuries, the Habsburgs faced a threat they could not charm, marry, or bribe away the will of the people. In the midst of chaos, a new figure stepped forward: Emperor Franz Joseph, only 18 years old. He would become the face of the empire's next chapter, young, idealistic, yet bound by the ghosts of his ancestors. His reign began with rebellion and would end in tragedy. But for now, As he stood on the balcony of Schönbrunn Palace, watching Vienna smolder, he vowed to restore what his forefathers had built. He did not yet know that the world he was fighting to preserve was already slipping through his fingers. The same web of power that had sustained his family for centuries was unraveling strand by strand. The age of kings was dying, and the empire that once ruled Europe by love, marriage, and blood was now being stalked by the rising shadow of nations. And so, as dawn breaks over Vienna, the question echoes once more, one that no Habsburg emperor has ever dared to answer aloud. How long can a dynasty built on power and blood outlast the world that no longer believes in either? Empire on the EDGI. The year is 1848, and the streets of Vienna roar like a furnace. Smoke, gunfire, and the sound of voices long silenced now thunder against the palace walls. The empire that once ruled through whispers and marriages finds itself trembling before something it cannot seduce or silence: the people. The Habsburg monarchy, the web that once held Europe together, is unraveling. The young emperor, Franz Joseph, stands behind tall windows, staring at his city in revolt. He is only 18, newly crowned, yet the weight of centuries already bows his shoulders. He has inherited not only the empire, but its ghosts, the burden of keeping the impossible alive. As he watches the barricades rise, he whispers to an aide, "If we fall, Europe falls with us." It is not arrogance, it is truth. The Habsburg monarchy is Europe's last balance point, a fragile wall holding back the tide of nationalism that threatens to wash the old world away. The revolutions of 1848 sweep across the continent like wildfire. France overthrows its king. Italy demands unification. Hungary, long a jewel in the Habsburg crown, declares independence. In Vienna, students wave flags and sing anthems of freedom. The empire is breaking apart, and for a moment, it seems as if the Habsburgs will be swept into history's dustbin. But this family has a talent that has saved them again and again: survival through patience and control. Franz Joseph, advised by his formidable mother, Archduchess Sophie, acts not with passion but precision. He crushes the revolution in Vienna, then turns to Hungary. There, a charismatic leader named Lajos Kossuth rises, calling for liberty, calling for a Hungary free of imperial chains. Franz Joseph cannot allow it. The Habsburg crown depends on keeping the empire's patchwork of nations bound together: Czechs, Hungarians, Croats, Austrians, Italians, all under one monarch. When Hungarian forces threaten Vienna, Franz Joseph makes a desperate decision. He calls for help not from his own armies, but from the Russian Tsar. And so, an empire saves another empire. Russian troops march into Hungary, crushing the revolution with brutal efficiency. Thousands die, and Kossuth flees into exile. The rebellion is silenced. For now, peace returns, but it is the peace of exhaustion. The empire has survived, yet something vital has changed. The people have seen their own power. Ideas cannot be bayoneted forever. Over the next decade, Franz Joseph rebuilds. He reforms the army, restores order, and wraps the empire once more in ceremony and splendor. The imperial court becomes a fortress of glitter, a world of uniforms, jewels, and protocol designed to distract from the growing cracks beneath. The emperor himself becomes a symbol of discipline, duty, and divine authority. But inside, he is lonely. And then she enters his life, Elizabeth of Bavaria-Hesse, barely 16, free-spirited, rebellious, and beautiful. She captures the emperor's heart. Their love story begins like a fairy tale, but soon becomes a cage. The court tries to tame her wild spirit, smothering her under the weight of etiquette. Sissy becomes both prisoner and symbol, face of youth and grace, hiding the decay of empire. The people adore her, but even she cannot stop the tides that are rising beyond the palace gates. While Vienna waltzes, the world shifts again. Across the Alps, a new power risks Prussia. Under Otto von Bismarck, Prussia dreams of uniting all German states under its banner, stripping Austria of its leadership in the German world. In 1866, that dream turns to war. The Austro-Prussian War is swift and merciless. The Habsburg armies, proud and old-fashioned, crumble before Prussia's modern guns and railroads. At Königgrätz, the Austrian Empire is humiliated. For the first time in centuries, the Habsburgs are forced to face a bitter truth. They are no longer the masters of Europe's destiny. Germany will unite without them, yet even defeat cannot kill the dynasty. Franz Joseph adapts once more. In 1867, he makes a bold and desperate move, one that will define the next half-century of his reign. He creates the Austro-Hungarian Compromise, sharing power with Hungary to keep the empire alive. It is a delicate balance: 2 crowns, 2 capitals, 1 emperor. Austria and Hungary become partners in an uneasy union, bound by a single monarch but divided in everything else. The empire is reborn, not as a giant, but as a survivor. Its flag still flies, its palaces still gleam, and its people, though restless, still bow. Yet beneath this fragile peace lies a volcano. Dozens of nationalities, Czechs, Slovaks, Serbs, Croats, Poles, Italians, all dream of independence. The emperor's government tries to hold them together with bureaucracy and compromise. But the heart of the empire beats irregularly. And then, as if history demands its symmetry, tragedy strikes again and again. Franz Joseph's brother, Maximilian, is executed in Mexico after a failed attempt to rule a foreign throne. His only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolph, is found dead. In Mailing, beside his mistress, a suicide that shatters the empire's future. The emperor grows old and weary. Even Sissi, the empress who once enchanted all of Europe, withdraws into melancholy, traveling endlessly to escape the suffocating weight of her crown until one day, she too falls victim to violence, assassinated in Geneva by an anarchist's blade. By the dawn of the 20th century, the empire stands majestic but hollow, a grand facade, masking a world about to explode. Vienna remains the jewel of Europe, a city of music, art, and philosophy, yet all around it, the old borders tremble. Nationalism grows fiercer. The Balkans boil with unrest. And in the shadows, the next storm gathers, a storm that will sweep away not only the Habsburgs, but the entire age of empires. In the summer of 1914, an event will light the fuse. In Sarajevo, a gunshot will echo through the heart of the world. But that story, the final act of the Habsburg monarchy, belongs to another chapter, as the music of 1,000 waltzes fades into silence. One question hangs in the air: can even the oldest and most enduring dynasty survive when the world decides it no longer needs emperors? The fall of EAGLSAT is June 28, 1914, a warm Sunday morning in Sarajevo. Crowds line the streets, waving small flags as an open car rolls past. Inside sit Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife, Sophie. Their faces are calm, unaware that they are minutes away from death and that the world, too, is about to die with them. When a young Bosnian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip steps out from the crowd and fires 2 shots, history shatters. The first bullet strikes Sophie. The second hits the Archduke. Within seconds, the heirs of an empire lie bleeding on the cobblestones. The crowd freezes, then scatters. In that single moment, centuries of Habsburg rule begin to unravel. News reaches Vienna like a ghostly whisper. Franz Joseph, now 84, receives the message with quiet resignation. So it has come, he murmurs to his ministers. The assassination is not just a tragedy, is an opportunity. They see it as a chance to crush Serbia, whose nationalism threatens the empire's fragile unity. But what they cannot see is the abyss waiting beyond their anger. Within weeks, Austria-Hungary issues an ultimatum to Serbia. The demands are impossible, deliberately so. Serbia agrees to most, but not all. The empire declares war. Alliances ignite. Across Europe, like a line of falling dominoes, Russia backs Serbia. Germany supports Austria-Hungary, France stands with Russia, and Britain steps in to protect the balance. The world plunges into the inferno of World War I for the Habsburgs. The war begins as a crusade to preserve the empire. But soon, it becomes a funeral march. The empire's Armazan, uneasy mix of languages, loyalties, and grudges stumble into battle against better prepared foes. Soldiers from every corner of the monarchy fight side by side, yet barely understand one another's tongues. Czech peasants, Hungarian hussars, Croatian riflemen, Polish volunteers, all under a single imperial flag that fewer and fewer still believe in. The war drains Vienna of hope. Food grows scarce, factories shut down, and the once glittering capital becomes a city of hunger and grief. The old emperor, now a ghost of his former self, prays daily for peace, but the machine he helped set in motion cannot stop. In 1916, Franz Joseph dies. His body is laid to rest in the imperial crypt beneath the Capuchin church, among the long line of his ancestors. As the coffin lowers, the question that haunted his reign remains unanswered. How do you keep an empire alive when its people no longer wish to be ruled? His successor, Emperor Karl I, inherits not a crown, but a crumbling world. Young, earnest, and deeply religious, Karl dreams of peace. He sends secret messages to France, Britain, and even the Pope, hoping to end the war through negotiation. But the machine of empire, the generals, the ministers, the German allies, ignores him. Karl is a king trying to stop an avalanche with his hands. By 1918, the empire is collapsing from within. Nationalism, once a whisper, now screams from every province. Hungary demands independence. The Czechs and Slovaks form their own state. The Poles, South Slavs, and Romanians break away. The double-headed eagle, symbol of Habsburg majesty, loses one wing after another, until only Vienna remains, and even there, the streets turn against the throne, as the guns of war finally fall. Silent in November 1918, a messenger rushes to Schönbrunn Palace. The emperor is no longer emperor. The monarchy has fallen. Karl, still wearing his military coat, signs his abdication with trembling hands. I renounce participation in the affairs of state, he says, but he refuses to formally abdicate, clinging to the hope that the Habsburgs might one day return. Outside, the empire dissolves like snow under spring rain. Austria shrinks to a small republic, stripped of its crown, its colonies, and its pride. The once mighty monarch who ruled over 50 million people now packs a suitcase and leaves in silence. He is exiled to Switzerland, then to the Portuguese island of Madeira, where he dies in 1922 at the age of 34, his dream of restoration buried with him. Vienna, the heart of an empire, becomes a heart without a body. Its grand palaces stand empty, its halls echoing with memories of power that once ruled half the world. The Habsburgs, who for 7 centuries married their way into history, vanish overnight into exile, their fortunes seized, their name forbidden in Austria. Yet even in defeat, the Habsburg legacy refuses to die. The dynasty's descendants scatter across Europe, some living quietly, others becoming scholars, soldiers, or exiles of faded nobility. The name still carries the ghost of its old power, whispered in museums and marble halls where portraits of emperors watch in silence. And then, as if mocking the arrogance of history, Europe tears itself apart again. 2 decades after the fall of the Habsburg monarchy, another war begins, this time, not for crowns or empires, but for ideology and survival. The lands that once made up Austria-Hungary become the battlefields of World War II, soaked again in blood. The old order is gone forever. Yet something curious happens after the war. In Vienna, a city once ruled by emperors and diplomats, people begin to remember not the tyranny, but the stability. They speak of the Habsburgs with a strange nostalgia, as though the empire's ghosts still watch over the Danube. The family that once defined Europe's politics becomes its memory, a reminder of how power can endure for centuries and vanish in a day. Even today, you can walk the cobblestone streets of Vienna and feel them watching. In the Hofburg Palace, the air still smells faintly of old wood and candle wax. The portraits still hang. The double-headed eagle still decorates the ceilings. And somewhere, perhaps, the echo of Rudolph's ancient words still whispers through the halls. Others may make war. You, fortunate Austria, shall marry. But the marriages are long over. The wars have ended. And what remains is the story of how one family bound the world together until the world tore itself apart. As the final echoes of the empire fade into history, one question remains. Suspended between grandeur and tragedy, was the fall of the Habsburgs the end of an age or merely the beginning of the modern world they unwillingly helped create? Legacy of the broken CROWN, the empire is gone. Its banners torn down, its palaces stripped of their thrones, its crown locked away in a museum. Yet somehow, even in death, the Habsburg name refuses to vanish. Like an echo trapped in stone, it lingers across Europe and the architecture, in the bloodlines of kings, in the very idea of what Europe once was. In the years after the Great War, the Austro-Hungarian Empire becomes a ghost haunting the modern age. Vienna, once the capital of a realm that stretched across continents, shrinks to the capital of a small republic, barely a fraction of its former size. But the memories remain. The cafes that once buzzed with diplomats now hum with artists, poets, and dreamers. The empire's collapse gives birth to a new kind of power ideas, and from its ruins rises the cultural explosion of the early 20th century. Freud deciphers the human mind in the same city where emperors once dictated law. Mahler, Klimt, and Schönberg transform music and art into rebellion. The empire's grand salons become incubators of genius. Vienna, freed from the weight of monarchy, becomes the cradle of modern thought, a strange irony that would have terrified the old emperors. The Habsburgs had ruled minds through ceremony. Now, ideas rule without crowns. Yet, even as the city blossoms, the old order casts long shadows. The empire's fall left millions stranded outside new borders: Austrians in Czechoslovakia, Hungarians in Romania, Croats in Italy. The neat lines drawn by diplomats could not erase centuries of shared history. The ghosts of nationalism, the same forces that once tore the empire apart, now breed fresh conflicts across Europe. When World War II erupts, the lands of the former Habsburg realm once again become a battlefield. Hitler's Germany absorbs Austria, declaring it the Anschluss, the reunification of German-speaking peoples. For a brief, dark moment, the dream of a united Central Europe returns, but twisted into nightmare. The empire's lands are carved and occupied, its people divided again, and Vienna, the city of waltzes, falls under the boot of totalitarianism. And yet, history's pendulum swings back once more. In 1945, as the world emerges from the ashes, Austria reclaims its independence not as an empire, but as a small republic, neutral, peaceful, and proud. The age of crowns is over. The Habsburgs remain in exile, scattered across the world, their titles now only ceremonial. But even stripped of power, their story continues. Otto von Habsburg, the last crowned prince of Austria-Hungary, becomes a different kind of emperor, man of words instead of armies. Educated, fluent in half a dozen languages, and deeply European, he dedicates his life to healing the wounds his ancestors left behind. He advocates for democracy, unity, and the idea that Europe could exist not as rival nations, but as a shared civilization. When he later helps shape the modern European Parliament, many quietly call it poetic justice, the final transformation of a dynasty that once ruled by marriage, now uniting nations by peace. The irony is beautiful. The family that once wove Europe together through bloodlines now helps weave it together through ideals. Otto's speeches echo with the lessons of his ancestors' fall: that power without understanding is brittle, that arrogance without compassion leads to ruin, and that unity built on fear always crumbles. But history is never simply a line, it is a spiral. Today, more than a century after the empire's end, the Habsburg name still flickers like candlelight in the dark. Tourists wander through Schönbrunn Palace, gazing at golden halls where Mozart once played for emperors. In the imperial crypt, marble coffins rest in silent rows. Rudolph, Maria Theresa, Franz Joseph, Sisich name a monument to the heights and horrors of human ambition. And still, people come. They place flowers, whisper prayers, or simply stare in awe at the legacy of a family that once ruled the world by love, faith, and politics. They come not to mourn the empire's fall, but to understand what it meant. Because, in the Habsburg story, lies something far larger than royal titles or marble palaces. It is the story of Europe itself. It is the story of how power, when wielded without restraint, devours its own children. Of how families, nations, and empires rise not through destiny, but through choices, each one linking to the next, until the web becomes too tangled to escape. The Habsburgs did not conquer Europe by the sword. They seduced it through blood and marriage. And in doing so, they built a world that could not last forever. Yet their legacy endures. Quietly, in the way Europe remembers itself. The European Union's ideals of unity amid diversity echo the old imperial dream, but with one profound difference. This time, no crown sits above the nations. No dynasty pulls the strings. The lessons of Vienna, of Sarajevo, of centuries of both glory and tragedy, live on in a continent still learning what it means to share power rather than obey it. So perhaps, the Habsburg story was never just a tale of emperors and crowns. It was a warning and a prophecy, the rise and fall of a family that tried to turn politics into eternity. Their castles crumble, their jewels gather dust, but their influence hums beneath every alliance, every treaty, every dream of a united Europe. Because even after the eagle fell, its shadow remained, and so as night descends on the marble city that once ruled the world, the question lingers like music fading into the dark. Did the Habsburgs truly fall, or did they simply change shape, becoming the invisible thread that still binds Europe together? Epilogue: the echo of EMPIHS, long after the cannons have gone silent and the crowns have been locked away behind glass. The story of the Habsburg monarchy still breathes in the stones of Europe. Walk through Vienna at dusk and you can feel it, the ghostly hum beneath the cobblestones, the faint rhythm of carriages that no longer ride. The empire is gone, yes, but its echo remains, woven into everything Europe has become. In a quiet corner of the Hofburg Palace, the same corridors where emperors once decided the fate of nations now house museums. Tourists wander past portraits of men and women whose gazes seem to follow them: Charles V, Maria Theresa, Franz Joseph, Sissi, both triumphant and tragic, as if aware of how their power both shaped and doomed them. And as you stand before those portraits, you begin to see it. Their story is not ancient history, it is a mirror. For what was the Habsburg monarchy, if not a test of how long unity can survive under the weight of difference? How long can an empire hold together when it rules Czechs, Poles, Italians, Hungarians, and Austrians, each dreaming of their own destiny? That same question echoes today in parliaments and borders, in debates over identity, migration, and belonging. The Habsburgs ruled by holding contradictions together. Modern Europe governs by trying not to repeat their mistakes, but perhaps what makes their story so haunting is not their power rights, their humanity. Behind every treaty and battle lay the faces of people who could not escape the machine they built. Rudolph's despair, Sissi's loneliness, Charles's faith, they remind us that empires are not just made of marble and maps. They are made of people who believe, who hope, who suffer, and who break. It's easy to think of the Habsburgs as relics of another world, but their legacy lingers in subtle ways. When Europe speaks of diplomacy instead of dominance, of cooperation instead of conquest, it unknowingly borrows from their greatest strength, the art of endurance through connection. The Habsburgs understood that survival required relationships, even flawed ones. They just forgot that love without freedom eventually strangles both. Today, the descendants of that dynasty live quietly, scattered across Europe. Some work in law, others in business or humanitarian service. Their palaces are museums, their crowns, museum pieces. And yet, when Otto von Habsburg's coffin was carried through Vienna in 2011, tens of thousands lined the streets, not in nostalgia for monarchy, but in respect for history. The old ritual was repeated one last time. The coffin reached the gates of the Capuchin crypt, and a herald knocked. "Who seeks entry?" a friar asked from inside. "Otto of Austria, former crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire." The friar's voice came back, firm and ancient. We know him not. The herald knocked again. Who seeks entry? Otto of Austria, member of the European Parliament. Again, the friar replied, We know him not. A third time, the herald knocked. Who seeks entry? Otto, a mortal and sinful man. This time, the doors opened. That simple rituals, the same used for every Habsburg burial for centuries, summed up the dynasty's long journey. Once emperors of half the world, they entered death not as rulers, but as humans. And in that humility, perhaps, lies the final lesson of the Habsburg monarchy, that even the greatest power ends the same way all crowns fall. All empires fade, and only the echo of their choices remains. So, as you step out into the Vienna night, the city glows with soft light. The air smells of coffee and rain. Somewhere, a violinist plays a waltz by Strauss, and for a moment, the centuries collapse the laughter of courtiers. The sound of boots on marble, the hum of whispered treaties. The empire is gone, but its shadow still dances. And maybe that's the real secret of the Habsburgs. They never truly vanished. They became Europe's memory, its triumphs, its tragedies, its longing for unity despite difference. They remind us that history is not just what we inherit, it's what we repeat unless we learn to see it clearly. So next time you hear the word empire, remember this dynasty that built one of the greatest webs in human histories, spun, not with steel, but with love, blood, and ambition. The Habsburgs ruled for 7 centuries, not because they were invincible, but because they understood one truth that still shapes the world today. Power is fragile, but legacy is forever. And in the soft ringing of church bells over Vienna, you can almost hear it, the faint echo of Rudolph's ancient vow, drifting through time like a whisper across the ages. Let others wage war. You, fortunate Austria, shall marry. The marriages are long over, but the echoes, they never stopped. The end.